In a glass-walled office on the 45th floor of Seoul's most imposing tower, Sun Yung stood flanked by three of his enforcers, their tailored suits concealing weapons, and coldly delivered the words to Angela Robertson, "You're fired." No one in the room knew it was only a test, a brutal evaluation of loyalty he'd inherited from his father's playbook. But Angela's response made Sun Yung's jaw tighten. Disrupting the calculation he'd relied on his entire life. She didn't plead for mercy. She didn't shrink beneath the weight of his authority. Instead, she met his gaze with quiet steel and said something that cracked the foundation of everything he believed about power. What did she say? Pause. Subscribe real quick. And drop your country in the comments. You need to witness what happens next. Angela Robertson woke at 4:45 every morning to the buzz of her phone alarm in the cramped studio she shared with two other immigrant workers in Itaewon. The room was barely large enough for three mattresses on the floor, separated by thin curtains strung on wire. She claimed the corner spot by the window, not for the view of the alley below, but because the draft kept her alert. By 5:15, she was dressed in her cleaning uniform, black pants, and a white shirt pressed the night before, hair pulled back tight. She made instant coffee in silence while her roommate slept. On the counter sat her phone, open to a messaging app. The last message was from her younger brother Marcus, sent 14 hours ago from Philadelphia. Mom's treatment is $3,200 this month. Insurance won't cover it. Can you send more? Angela had already sent everything she could. Her mother had breast cancer. Stage 3 when they caught it, now stage 4. The treatment was aggressive, experimental, expensive. Her father had died when Angela was 12. A construction accident that left the family with debt instead of inheritance. Marcus was 19, working 2 jobs while taking night classes. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. So Angela had left Philadelphia 3 years ago, following a recruitment agency's promise of domestic work in South Korea. The pay was triple what she'd earned cleaning hotels back home. She kept that promise to her mother. I'll make sure you get the treatment, no matter what. But the math was getting impossible. After rent, food, and the remittance fees, she was sending $2,400 home each month. This month's treatment cost more. The hospital had already sent 2 payment reminders. Her mother's next appointment was in 6 days. Angela checked the time, 5:47. She grabbed her transit card and left the apartment, descending 5 flights of stairs because the elevator had been broken for 2 weeks. The subway was already packed with early shift workers, construction crews, delivery drivers, cleaning staff like her. She stood pressed against the door, her reflection ghosted in the dark tunnel glass. 28 years old, invisible to most of the city she cleaned. By 6:45, she arrived at Yongsan Tower, headquarters of Yongsan Holdings, the legitimate face of the Sun family's empire. She changed into her building-issued uniform in the staff locker room, tied her hair back tighter, and took the service elevator to the executive floors. She'd been cleaning Sun Yung's office for 8 months. In that time, she'd learned 3 things about him. He arrived before sunrise. He never acknowledged the cleaning staff, and he kept his spaces immaculate, except for a single photograph on his desk, always face down, which he was forbidden to touch. She'd never spoken to him directly, not once. This morning, when she pushed her cart onto the 45th floor, she found the office lights already on. Sun Yung sat at his desk, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. His expression unreadable. 3 men in identical dark suits stood behind him, hands clasped in front of them, eyes tracking her every movement. Angela felt the air change. Something was wrong. Angela Robertson, Sun Yung said, his voice flat, accented English precise. He didn't stand. You're fired. The words hung in the air like a blade. One of the enforcers stepped forward with a manila envelope. Severance pay. You have 10 minutes to collect your belongings and leave the building. Angela's hands tightened on the handle of her cleaning cart. Her mind raced through the implications. No job meant no visa sponsorship. No visa meant deportation. Deportation meant her mother's treatment stopped. Marcus couldn't carry this alone. Her mother had 6 months, maybe less, without treatment. But Angela had learned long ago that begging accomplished nothing. She'd learned the day her father's employer refused to cover the accident. The day the hospital threatened to stop her mother's first round of chemo. The day the landlord tried to evict him when she was 16. Dignity was the only thing poverty couldn't take from you. She looked directly at Sun Yung, past the enforcers, past the performance of power. She saw a man testing her, measuring her, expecting her to break. "I understand," she said quietly. "I just need one thing." Sun Yung's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "What?" "My last paycheck. Can you process it today instead of next week? My mother's cancer treatment is due in 6 days. The hospital in Philadelphia won't wait, and I need to wire the money before I'm deported. After that, you'll never see me again." The room went silent. Angela didn't cry, didn't beg. She simply stated the truth, as if discussing the weather, because it was the only truth that mattered. Her mother's life, her brother's burden, the mathematics of survival. For the first time in 8 months, Sun Yung truly looked at her. And in that moment, something shifted behind his carefully constructed mask. A hairline fracture in the armor he'd worn since childhood, when his father had taught him that compassion was weakness and trust was a luxury that would get you killed. "Wait," Sun Yung said. Angela stood perfectly still. "It was a test," he continued, his voice lower now, almost uncertain. "You're not actually fired. I was evaluating your character." Angela didn't smile, didn't thank him. Instead, she did something none of his subordinates had ever dared. She judged him, her expression cooling with something that looked like disappointment. "A test," she repeated. "You thought threatening someone's livelihood, their family survival, was an appropriate test?" No one spoke. The enforcers shifted uncomfortably. "I'll continue working, Mr. Sun, because I need this job. But understand this. I don't work for you out of loyalty. I work because my mother is dying, and you pay enough for me to keep her alive a little longer. If you want to test people, test their work, not their desperation." She turned back to her cleaning cart, hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, and resumed her work as if the conversation had never happened. Behind her, Sun Yung sat frozen, a man who'd built an empire on intimidation and control, utterly unprepared for quiet defiance of someone with nothing left to lose and everything worth protecting. That night, in his private office, Sun Yung would open the security system and pull up the personnel file for Angela Robertson. He would read every detail. Her work history, her visa status, her remittance records. And then he would do something he'd never done before. He would watch the security footage of her daily routine, not to find weakness or disloyalty, but to understand a woman who'd looked him in the eye and taught him the difference between strength and cruelty. It was the first crack in his father's code. "Wait! Before I continue, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this next part is insane." Angela's hands were still shaking when she returned to the studio apartment that evening. She set her bag down quietly, careful not to wake Jawan, who worked the night shift at a convenience store and was already asleep behind her curtain. Sun, he wasn't home yet. She cleaned offices in Gangnam and wouldn't return until after midnight. The studio was 14 square meters, 3 mattresses, 3 small wardrobes pushed against the walls, a hot plate on a makeshift counter, a shared mini-fridge that hummed loudly enough to wake you if you thought about it. The bathroom was barely larger than an airplane lavatory. They'd hung curtains on wire to create the illusion of privacy, but sounds carried. Conversations, phone calls, tears. Angela had learned to cry silently. She sat on her mattress by the window and pulled out her phone. 8 messages from Marcus. She opened them one by one, her chest tightening with each notification. The hospital had called again. Mom's white blood cell count was dropping. They needed to start the next round of treatment immediately, not in 6 days. The cost had increased. Insurance was denying coverage on a technicality. Marcus had already borrowed money from his manager at the warehouse. It wasn't enough. Angela opened her banking app. Her balance, $847. Rent was due in 5 days, $380 for a third of the apartment. She'd already sent $2,400 home last week. The remittance fees alone had cost $73. She calculated quickly. If she sent everything now, she'd have $467 left. Not enough for rent. Not enough for food. Not enough for the subway card. She needed to get to work. She closed her eyes and did the math again, as if the numbers might change. They didn't. Her phone buzzed. Marcus calling. She answered. Angie. His voice was rough, tired. 23 years old, and he sounded 50. Did you get my messages? I got them. The hospital said if we don't pay by Friday, they're stopping treatment. Not postponing. Stopping. They said Mom's case is too high risk to carry on credit. Angela pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. Below, Itaewon streets pulsed with nightlife, bars, restaurants, crowds of people laughing and drinking. A different world from the one she inhabited, separated by more than just 45 floors. I can send 600, she said. That's all I have right now. 600? Angie, we need 3,200. I know what we need, Marcus. Her voice came out sharper than intended. She softened it. I'm sorry. I can send 600 tonight. I'll figure out the rest. How? You're already working 6 days a week. She didn't have an answer. She'd already taken every available shift, already skipped meals to save money, already wore the same 3 outfits on rotation, washing them by hand in the bathroom sink to avoid laundromat fees. There was nothing left to cut. I'll figure it out, she repeated, because that's what she'd been saying for 3 years. I'll figure it out. I'll make it work. Trust me, Mom keeps asking about you. Marcus said quietly. She thinks you're coming home for Christmas. Angela's throat closed. She hadn't been home in 2 years. Couldn't afford the plane ticket. Couldn't afford to miss work. Her mother didn't know how bad things were. Marcus had been lying to her, saying Angela was busy with promotion, with opportunities, with anything except the truth, that Angela cleaned toilets in a country where she couldn't read most signs, where people looked through her like glass, where her existence was tolerated only because she was useful. Tell her I love her, Angela said. Tell her I'm working on it. After they hung up, Angela sat in the dark for a long time. She could hear the city through the thin walls, voices in Korean, laughter, the growl of motorcycles, the bass thump from the Club 3 buildings over. Seoul was expensive and indifferent, a machine that consumed people like her and spat them out when they stopped being productive. She thought about Sun Young's test, the cruelty of it, how easily he could have destroyed her life with those 2 words, and how he'd treated it like a game. She thought about the way he'd looked at her afterward, something almost like surprise in his eyes, as if he'd expected her perform differently, to beg, to grovel. She'd learned early that begging changed nothing. She was 12 when her father died, 14 when the medical bills started piling up, 16 when she took her first real job cleaning houses in Chestnut Hill, where women wore her mother's hospital bills on their wrists as jewelry. She'd learned that the world didn't reward dignity, but it was the only thing that made survival bearable. Angela pulled out her laptop, a refurbished model she bought used 4 years ago, and logged into her remittance site. She transferred $600 to Marcus, watching her balance drop to $247. Then she opened a new tab and searched for loan services for foreign workers in Korea. The interest rates were criminal. 40%, 50%, 60% for short-term emergency loans. She read through the terms, her stomach turning. If she borrowed $2,600 at 48% interest for 6 months, she'd owe nearly $4,200 total. The monthly payments would be $700, more than she paid in rent. But her mother needed treatment on Friday. Angela filled out the application, her fingers steady despite everything screaming at her to stop. Name, passport number, employer, income. She uploaded photos of her work visa, her employee ID, 3 months of pay stubs. At the bottom, a box asked for the loan purpose. She typed, medical emergency. She submitted the application at 11:47 p.m. Sonny came home 20 minutes later, exhausted, and collapsed onto her mattress without changing. Ji-won's alarm would go off at 1:30 a.m. In 7 hours, Angela would wake and do it all again. The subway, the cleaning cart, the invisible labor that kept towers like Yongsan Holdings gleaming. She lay down and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Somewhere 45 floors above her in a penthouse she'd never see, Sun Young was probably sleeping in a bed larger than this entire apartment, unburdened by the mathematics of survival. She wondered if he'd ever actually been tested by anything real in his entire life. Her phone buzzed. Loan application approved. Funds available in 24 to 48 hours. Angela closed her eyes and felt the weight settle deeper into her chest. This was the price of keeping promises. This was what love cost when you were born without money. This was survival, and it looked nothing like the life she'd imagined as a girl in Philadelphia, studying hard and believing that work and dignity would be enough. But it was what she had, so she'd carry it. Sun Yung stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, 62 floors above Seoul, and watched the city burn with light. The apartment was 4,200 square feet of marble, glass, and calculated emptiness. White walls, black furniture. Nothing personal, except a single photograph he kept face down in his office. The space felt like a museum or a mausoleum, beautiful, sterile, lifeless. It was exactly how his father had designed it. Behind him, the dining table was set for a meeting he didn't want. 7 chairs, 7 place settings, 6 of them for men who would smile while measuring the distance to his throat. The 7th was his, the head of the table, a position he'd inherited 3 months ago when his father died of a heart attack in this very room, collapsing between the kitchen and the hallway as if his body had simply decided it was finished. Sun Yung had found him, had called the family doctor, not an ambulance, had waited 40 minutes for the man to arrive and pronounce death before calling anyone else, because that's what his father would have wanted. No public scandal, no questions. The Sun family handled their affairs internally, even death. His phone buzzed. A message from his uncle, Sun to 1. Running 10 minutes late. Start without me. Sun Yung deleted the message. His uncle was never late by accident. Every delay was calculated. A small assertion of power, a reminder that Sun Yung's position was still being evaluated, still contested. He walked to the bar and poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a crystal glass. His father's Macallan, aged 30 years, worth more per bottle than most Koreans earned in a month. He didn't drink it, just held it, feeling the weight, remembering. His father had given him his first lesson in the family business when he was 7 years old. They'd been in the car, driving back from a meeting. His father had pointed to a man on the sidewalk, middle-aged, well-dressed, laughing with colleagues outside a restaurant. That's Mr. Choi, his father had said. He borrowed money from us 6 months ago. Haven't seen a payment in 3. 2 days later, Mr. Choi's restaurant burned down. Insurance covered nothing. The man had shown up at their office a week later, begging, offering to sign over his house, his car, anything. His father had taken everything, then smiled and forgiven the debt. Do you know why I did that? His father had asked young Sun Yung afterward. Because he had nothing left to take? No, because now he's grateful. Now he's loyal. Fear makes people obey. Gratitude makes them serve willingly. But never, never let sentiment cloud the calculation. The moment you feel pity, you've lost. Sun Yung had learned that lesson thoroughly. By 12, he was sitting in on collections. By 15, he was present for negotiations that ended with broken bones. By 18, he'd watched his father orchestrate the removal of a rival faction leader. A clean disappearance, no body, no evidence. Just an empty chair at a table that had one seat at 8. By 25, Sun Yung had stopped feeling much of anything. His father had called it strength, control, the necessary evolution from boy to man to leader. You couldn't run an empire with a soft heart. The organization demanded decisiveness, ruthlessness, the ability to make choices that would destroy lives without hesitation. Trust was suicide. Compassion was weakness. Love was a liability that your enemies would exploit the moment they sensed it. His father had proven this when Sun Yung was 19. There had been a girl, Min Seo, a university student he'd met at a gallery opening. She hadn't known who he was, what his family did. She'd liked him for something other than fear or calculation. For 6 months, he'd hidden the relationship, met her in secret, felt something almost like normalcy. His father had found out. Min Seo's family had owned a small chain of restaurants in Busan. Within 2 weeks, they'd lost their suppliers, their permits, their bank loans. Her father had a heart attack from the stress. Her mother had called her home, devastated. Min Seo had figured it out, had shown up at the penthouse, crying, begging Sun Yung to stop it. His father had been there, had made Sun Yung watch as security escorted her out, had waited until her sobs faded in the elevator before turning to his son. This is what happens when you're careless. his father had said, voice calm, almost gentle. She was a vulnerability. I've eliminated the vulnerability. If you ever want to lead this family, you'll never let it happen again. Sun Yung had ended it, had paid for her father's medical bills anonymously, had ensured the restaurants reopened under new management with her family employed, and had never contacted her again. The guilt had lasted 6 months. Then it had calcified into something harder. Acceptance. Understanding. His father had been right. Sentiment was dangerous. In their world, the moment you cared about something, it became a weapon someone could use against you. Sun Yung had spent the next 8 years perfecting his father's teachings. He dismantled 2 rival factions, expanded the organization's legitimate holdings, and cultivated a reputation for cold efficiency. No one questioned his decisions. No one saw him hesitate. He'd become exactly what the family needed, a man without weaknesses, without ties, without anything that could be leveraged. Then his father had died, and the calculation changed. The family council, 6 men who'd served his father for decades, had been polite, respectful, but Sun Yung could see the evaluation in their eyes. His uncle especially, Sun Do-won, who'd been his father's younger brother and right hand. 53 years old, patient, ruthless, and hungry for control. At the funeral, his uncle had pulled him aside. Your father was a great man, Tae-won had said, but he was also pragmatic. He knew leadership wasn't inherited. It was earned. Proven. I've been proving myself for 15 years, Sun Yung had replied. To your father, yes, but your father made decisions alone. The family is different now. We work collectively. And we need to know you can lead without becoming sentimental. The word had hung in the air like poison. Since then, every decision Sun Yung made was watched. Every meeting was analyzed. The test with Angela Robertson had been Tae-won's suggestion, delivered as advice but functioned as command. Test your people randomly, his uncle had said. Find their breaking points. It's what your father would have done. Sun Yung had complied, had called Angela into his office, flanked by enforcers, and delivered the test exactly as designed. He'd expected fear, submission, proof that he could break people when necessary, that he'd inherited his father's capacity for calculated cruelty. Instead, Angela had looked at him with something worse than fear, disappointment, as if she'd expected better and found him wanting. No one had ever looked at him that way. The doorbell chimed. His uncle and the council members, arriving for tonight's meeting. Sun Yung set down the untouched whiskey and straightened his tie. The penthouse felt colder suddenly, despite the heated floors, despite the precision of the climate control. He walked to the door and opened it, his expression carefully neutral, his posture radiating the confidence his father had drilled into him. But as he greeted each man, his uncle's calculating smile, the other's careful deference, he couldn't stop thinking about Angela's words. You thought threatening someone's livelihood, their family survival, was an appropriate test? His father would have called her insolent, would have had her deported within the hour, her defiance crushed as a lesson to others. But his father was dead, and for the first time in Sun Yung's life, he wondered if the code that had made his father powerful had also made him profoundly, irrevocably alone. The meeting began. Sun Yung took his place at the head of the table, surrounded by men who would devour him the moment they sensed weakness. He played his role perfectly. But something had shifted, a hairline fracture in the foundation his father had built, and deep down in a place he'd thought was dead, Sun Yung realized he didn't want to become his father after all. Before I show you the craziest part, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from. This is about to get wild. The test happened on a Thursday morning, 3 days after the family council meeting. Sun Yung had scheduled it for 7:15 a.m. before most of the building staff arrived. His uncle's voice echoed in his head from that meeting. Your father tested loyalty constantly. It's how he knew who to trust and who to eliminate. You're too soft with the lower staff. They need to fear you. Sun Yung had 3 of his men present, Minho, Jae-sung, and Hyun-woo, positioned behind his desk like sentries. He'd rehearsed this. Quick, brutal, efficient. Fire her without explanation. Watch her reaction. Gauge her desperation. If she begged, she was manageable. If she raged, she was a risk. His father had performed dozens of these tests. It was standard protocol. Angela entered at exactly 7:15, push of her cleaning cart. She wore the building standard uniform, her hair pulled back, so tightly it looked painful. She glanced at the three men, her expression registering caution but not fear, and began setting up her supplies. "Angela Robertson," Sun Yung said, his voice flat. She turned, meeting his eyes. "Yes, Mr. Sun? You're fired." He watched the flinch, the tremor, the crack in composure. It didn't come. Angela stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, processing. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. Min-ho shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Effective immediately. Sun Yung continued, following the script his father had used. "You have 10 minutes to collect your belongings and exit the building." Min-ho stepped forward, holding a manila envelope. "Severance pay. Sign here." Angela didn't reach for the envelope. She looked at Sun Yung with an expression he couldn't categorize. Not fear, not anger. Something quieter and more unsettling. "May I ask why?" she said finally. "No," Sun Yung replied, the way his father would have. "Company policy. 10 minutes. Angela nodded slowly. Then she did something unexpected. She didn't argue about the termination. Instead, she said, "I understand. I just need one thing." Sun Yung felt the first flicker of curiosity. "What?" "My last paycheck. Can you process it today instead of next week?" Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "My mother's cancer treatment is due tomorrow. The hospital in Philadelphia won't wait, and I need to wire the money before my visa sponsorship ends and I'm required to leave the country. After that, you won't hear from me again." The room went still. Sun Yung had expected begging, tears, perhaps anger. He hadn't expected this. A simple, devastating statement of fact delivered with the same tone she might use to report a broken light bulb. "The remittance takes 2 business days," Angela continued, still composed. "If you process it today, it'll clear by Saturday morning. That gives me enough time." Min-ho glanced at Sun Yung, uncertain. This wasn't how these tests usually went. People broke. They showed their worst selves. Desperation, rage, manipulation. Angela was showing something else entirely. Dignity under pressure. Clarity in crisis. Sun Yung felt something shift in his chest, an uncomfortable recognition. She wasn't playing a game. She wasn't performing. She was simply stating her reality. This job meant her mother's survival, and she was trying to salvage what she could from a situation she had no power to change. "Wait," Sun Yung said, the word coming out before he'd fully decided to speak. Angela remained still. "It was a test," he said. The admission felt wrong in his mouth, too honest, too exposed. "You're not actually fired. I was evaluating your character." The silence that followed was worse than anything that had come before. Angela's expression didn't soften with relief. It hardened with something that looked like contempt. "A test," she repeated quietly. "Yes, company policy. You thought threatening someone's livelihood, their family survival, was an appropriate test?" Her voice was still controlled, but there was steel underneath now. "You thought playing with people's desperation was a reasonable way to evaluate character?" No one spoke. Min-ho's hand moved toward his jacket. An instinctive response perceived disrespect. But Sun Yung raised a hand slightly, stopping him. His eyes stayed on Angela. "It's standard protocol," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "Standard for whom?" Angela asked. "For people who've never had to worry about money, who've never watched someone they love die because they couldn't afford treatment, who've never had to choose between rent and food." She took a breath, recentering herself, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter but no less cutting. "I'll continue working, Mr. Sun, because I need this job. But understand this. I don't work for you out of loyalty or respect. I work because my mother is dying, and you pay enough for me to keep her alive a little longer. If you want to test people, test their work ethic, test their honesty. Don't test their desperation, and call it character evaluation. That's not strength. That's just cruelty." Sun Yung felt the words land like physical blows. No employee had ever spoken to him this way. No one in his life had ever called him cruel to his face. People feared him, obeyed him, hated him quietly if they dared. But no one challenged the foundation of his actions. "You're dismissed," he said, reverting to authority because it was the only language he knew. Return to your duties. Angela held his gaze for one more moment. And in that moment, Sun Yung saw her judgment clearly. She wasn't impressed by his power, wasn't intimidated by his position. She saw him exactly as he was. A man playing at strength while wielding cruelty, testing others because he himself had never been truly tested by anything that mattered. She turned and left, pushing her cleaning cart toward the restrooms, her posture straight, her movements deliberate. The three men remained standing, waiting for instruction. Min-ho finally broke the silence. "Should we?" "No," Sun Yung said. "Leave it." After they left, Sun Yung sat alone in his office as dawn light filtered through the windows. He could hear the faint sound of Angela working in the bathroom down the hall. The spray of cleaning solution, the methodical wipe down of surfaces. Professional, thorough, unbroken. He thought about his father's tests, about Minesio's family, destroyed as a lesson, about Mr. Choi, stripped of everything to prove a point, about the dozens of people his father had broken to demonstrate control. His father had called it necessary, had said sentiment was weakness, had built an empire on the principle that power meant the ability to hurt people without consequence. But sitting in his office, listening to Angela clean toilets with the same steady dignity she'd shown when he tried to break her, Sun Yung wondered for the first time if his father had mistaken cruelty for strength. If maybe the strongest people weren't the ones who could inflict pain without flinching. Maybe they were the ones who could endure it without breaking. He opened his computer and pulled up Angela's personnel file. Started reading. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Sun Yung felt something his father had spent decades teaching him to suppress. Shame. Sun Yung told himself he was doing due diligence. That's what he called it when he accessed the security system at 11 p.m. that night, alone in his penthouse, pulling up the personnel records and surveillance protocols. Due diligence. Verification of claims. Standard background investigation. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. Angela's file was sparse. 3 years of employment. Perfect attendance, except for 2 sick days in year 1. No complaints. No commendations either. Cleaning staff rarely received formal recognition. Her visa was tied to her employment, renewed annually, currently valid through March. Salary: $2.8 million won per month, roughly $2,100 US, below market rate for Seoul, but standard for foreign domestic workers. He found her remittance records next. The company processed international transfers for employees as a service, taking a small percentage. Angela sent money home twice monthly, like clockwork. September, $2,400. August, $2,400. July, $2,400. Going back 3 years, the amounts varied slightly, but never dropped below $2,000. She was sending nearly 90% of her income to Philadelphia. Sun Yung pulled up the security feeds from her apartment building in Itaewon. The system had cameras in lobbies, hallways, and exterior entrances, standard surveillance that most residents didn't know existed. His family owned the building through a shell company. They owned 43 buildings across Seoul, all connected to the same security network. He found her building. 3rd floor, Unit 304. The hallway camera showed her door. He scrolled back to the footage, watching her comings and goings. She left at 5:47 a.m. each day, returned between 7:30 and 8 p.m., depending on her shift. Sometimes she carried grocery bags, never many, always the cheapest brands he could see through the plastic. Twice in the past week, she'd helped an elderly neighbor carry boxes up the stairs. He watched her stop to pick up trash in the hallway that wasn't hers. Watched her hold the building door for a delivery driver, whose hands were full. Small gestures. Unremarkable, except they revealed someone who hadn't let circumstance strip away basic decency. Sun Yung opened a new window and searched property records in Philadelphia. Found the address listed in her emergency contacts. A row house in a neighborhood where property values had declined 30% over the past decade. Tax records showed it was owned by Patricia Robertson, Angela's mother. Medical liens attached to property. $47,000. Hospital debt. He shouldn't have kept searching, but he did. He found the Facebook profile. Patricia Robertson, age 53, profile photo from what looked like 5 years ago. She was smiling, healthy, standing with 2 children, a younger Angela and a teenage boy, Marcus. The recent posts were sparse, mostly from Marcus now. Updates about his mother's treatment, requests for prayer, a GoFundMe that had raised $3,400 of a $50,000 goal. Sun Yung closed a laptop and sat in the dark of his penthouse. The city glowed outside his windows, indifferent and beautiful. He thought about Angela's question. Have you ever been tested by anything real? The answer was no, not like this. He'd been tested by his father, by the organization, by rivals who wanted him dead. But those were tests of strength, calculation, ruthlessness. He'd never been tested by the simple, grinding mathematics of survival. Had never had to choose between rent and medicine. Had never sent 90% of his income away and lived on the remainder. Had never loved someone enough to shoulder that weight without complaint. Over the next 2 weeks, Sun Yung found himself watching security feeds more often than he wanted to admit. He watched Angela's routine, saw her efficiency, her quiet competence. She didn't cut corners, didn't waste time. She moved through her work with the focus of someone who understood that her labor had direct, immediate consequences. He watched her help other cleaning staff, sharing supplies when someone ran out, watched her eat lunch alone in the staff break room, usually rice and whatever cheap meal she prepared the night before. She never used her phone during work hours, never socialized, never took breaks longer than required. And he started noticing other things. The building's cleaning staff worked 12-hour shifts with one 30-minute break. They bought their own supplies when the company's stock ran low. They had no sick leave, no health insurance, no benefits beyond their base pay. His father had called it efficiency. Minimum overhead, maximum productivity. Sun Yung called a meeting with HR and facilities management. I want a policy review, he said. Cleaning staff, security, maintenance. All lower-tier employees. The HR director looked confused. Is there a problem, sir? I want a full audit of working conditions, benefits, and compensation. Standard industry comparison. Have it on my desk by Friday. He framed it as operational efficiency. Told his uncle it was about reducing turnover costs, maintaining building standards. His uncle had shrugged, unconcerned with such minor administrative details. The report came back worse than Sun Yung expected. The company's lower-tier workers earned 15% below market rate. They had no paid leave, no health coverage, no retirement contributions. Turnover was 80% annually. Training costs were enormous. Sun Yung implemented changes slowly, carefully, so no one would question his motives. He raised base pay for all cleaning and maintenance staff by 20%, framed as a retention initiative. He added basic health insurance, calling it a liability reduction. He reduced shift hours from 12 to 10, citing productivity studies. His CFO praised him for forward-thinking management. His uncle barely noticed. But Sun Yung noticed when Angela's next paycheck reflected the increase. Watched the security feed as she checked her bank balance on her phone in the staff break room. Her expression shifting from confusion to something that might have been relief. She sent the extra money home that same day. He found himself watching her more. Noticed she'd started buying slightly better groceries. Nothing extravagant. Fresh vegetables instead of instant noodles, actual fruit. She replaced her worn work shoes. Small improvements that shouldn't have mattered to him, but they did. Late one night, Sun Yung sat in a security room reviewing feeds and realized what he was doing. He wasn't conducting due diligence. He wasn't verifying claims. He was watching Angela Robertson's life because she'd shown him something he'd never seen before. What it looked like to be genuinely strong. Not strong like his father. Able to destroy without feeling. Strong like Angela. Able to endure without breaking. Able to carry impossible weight with dignity. Able to look at someone with power and see them clearly without fear or illusion. He'd spent his entire life learning how to make people fear him. Angela had taught him in one conversation that fear wasn't respect, that cruelty wasn't strength, that his father's empire was built on the broken backs of people like her, and he'd never even noticed. Sun Yung closed the security feed and sat in the dark. Tomorrow, Angela would arrive at 5:47 a.m. She'd clean his office, his bathroom, his conference room. She'd be efficient and professional and invisible, the way his father had designed the system. Except she wasn't invisible anymore. Not to him. And Sun Yung realized with something close to panic that he didn't know what to do with this knowledge. Didn't know how to reconcile the man his father had trained him to be with the man Angela's quiet dignity suggested he might become. All he knew was that he couldn't stop watching. Couldn't stop trying to understand what it meant to be the kind of person who survived on dignity when you had nothing else left. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while Angela was restocking supplies in the service closet on the 45th floor. Sun Yung heard her phone ring from his office. The door was open. He'd been listening for her movements all morning without admitting why. He heard her answer in English, her voice bright with forced cheer. "Hey, Marcus." "What's?" Then silence. Long enough that Sun Yung stood from his desk, concerned. When Angela spoke again, her voice had changed completely. "What do you mean collapsed? When? Is she?" Another pause. "How much?" "Marcus, I don't have." Sun Yung moved to his doorway. Angela stood in the hallway, one hand pressed against the wall for balance, phone clutched in the other. Her face had gone ashen. 7,200? Her voice cracked. "For emergency surgery? When do they need? Tonight?" "Marcus, I can't. There's no way I can." She was breaking. Sun Yung could see it happening in real time. The careful composure she maintained every day, fracturing under pressure she couldn't carry. "I'll figure it out," Angela said, but there was no conviction in it. "Just tell them to do the surgery. Don't let them wait. I'll get the money somehow. I promise." She ended the call and stood motionless, staring at her phone. Then she did something Sun Yung had never seen her do. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, breathing hard like she couldn't get enough air. Sun Yung found himself walking toward her before he'd made a conscious decision. "Angela." She looked up, startled, and immediately tried to stand. "Mr. Sun, I'm sorry, I was just—" "Stay," he said. "What happened?" "Nothing. Personal issue. I'll get back to work." "Your mother—" Angela froze. Sun Yung shouldn't have known that. Shouldn't have revealed he knew that. "She collapsed," he continued. "Committed now. Emergency surgery. $7,200 needed tonight." Angela's expression shifted from shock to something harder. "Have you been listening to my phone calls?" "No. I heard you just now." Partially true. He wasn't monitoring her calls. Just her life. "How much do you have?" "That's not—" "How much, Angela?" She looked at him for a long moment, weighing dignity against desperation. Desperation won. $800. I sent everything else home last week for this month's treatment. The loan I took out is maxed. I have no one else to ask. Sun Yung pulled out his phone. "What's the hospital name?" "Mr. Sun." "The hospital? Now." "Temple University Hospital, Philadelphia. But I can't accept." Sun Yung was already dialing. One of his financial managers, a man who handled the family's international transactions, answered immediately. "I need $7,200 wired to Temple University Hospital in Philadelphia within the hour. Patient name Patricia Robertson. Emergency surgery payment. Use the emergency account." "Yes, sir." Immediately. He ended the call. Angela was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. "You can't. That's too much. I'll never be able to pay you back." "I'm not asking you to. Why would you do this?" Her voice was raw, confused, almost angry. "You tested me. You tried to break me. Now what is this?" Another test. Sun Yung crouched down so they were eye level. This close, he could see how exhausted she was. How much weight she'd lost since he'd started watching. How the constant pressure had carved lines into her face that shouldn't be there at 28. "My father taught me that sentiment was weakness," he said quietly. "That caring about people made you vulnerable. That power meant the ability to hurt people without consequence." He paused. "You asked if I'd ever been tested by anything real. The answer is no. But watching you carry what you carry, with the dignity you maintain, I'm starting to think my father confused cruelty with strength. And I don't want to make that mistake anymore." Angela's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. "I don't understand you. I don't understand myself lately." Sun Yung stood, offering his hand. "Your mother's surgery is covered. Take the rest of the day off. Call your brother. Be with your family, even if it's only by phone. She took his hand and let him help her up. Her fingers were trembling. Thank you, she whispered. Sun Yung nodded and walked back to his office, closing the door before she could see how much that simple gratitude had affected him. He'd just exposed himself completely, revealed he knew about her family, used family resources for a personal intervention, showed weakness that his uncle would exploit if he ever found out. His father would call it catastrophic failure. But standing in his office, knowing Angela's mother would survive the night, Sun Yung felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt human. Sun Yung found Angela on the roof garden 3 days later. It was 6 p.m., past her shift, but she was still there, sitting on a concrete bench overlooking the city. The sky was bruising purple with sunset. She didn't turn when he approached, but he knew she'd heard him. Your mother came through the surgery, he said. Not a question. He'd been monitoring the hospital records. She did. Angela's voice was quiet. Marcus says she's stable, responding to treatment. They're optimistic. Good. Silence settled between them. Sun Yung should have left, should have maintained the distance his position required. Instead, he sat down on the bench, leaving space between them, and watched the city lights begin to flicker on like stars. Why did you help me? Angela asked finally. And don't say it was the right thing to do. People like you don't make decisions based on right and wrong. You make them based on calculation. So, what was the calculation? Sun Yung had prepared for this question, had rehearsed reasonable answers. But sitting here with her, watching the last light drain from the sky, the rehearsed answers felt dishonest. There was no calculation, he said. That's what scares me. Angela turned to look at him, then really look at him. What do you mean? My father raised me to be a certain kind of man. Every decision had to serve a purpose. Every relationship had to provide leverage. Sentiment was weakness. Compassion was liability. Love was... He stopped, the word catching in his throat. Love was the most dangerous thing you could feel because it gave your enemies a target. That sounds like a terrible way to live. It kept him alive for 63 years. Kept him powerful. Kept the family intact. Sun Yung stared at his hands. When I was 19, I had a girlfriend, Maid. She didn't know who my family was, what we did. She liked me because I made her laugh, because I listened when she talked about her dreams. For 6 months, I was just normal. What happened? My father found out. He destroyed her family's business, ruined them financially. When she figured out I was the reason, she came to beg me to stop it. My father made me watch his security, threw her out. Then he told me that's what happens when you're careless, that she was a vulnerability he'd eliminated. Angela's expression softened slightly. Did you love her? I thought I did, but I ended it. Paid her family's debts anonymously and never contacted her again. And I told myself my father was right. That caring about people made you weak, made you a target. He looked at Angela. I've spent 15 years perfecting that code, becoming the man my father wanted, someone who could make any decision without hesitation, without feeling. Then why help me? Because watching you change something. The admission felt like tearing open his chest. You carry this impossible weight with dignity. You sacrifice everything for your family without expecting anything in return. You looked at me during that test, and you weren't impressed by my power. You saw exactly what I was, someone confusing cruelty with strength, and you weren't afraid to tell me. Sun Yung turned to face her fully. My father's code taught me how to survive, how to maintain control, how to build and protect an empire. But you, his voice dropped, watching you made me realize I don't know how to actually live. I don't know what it means to love something more than you fear losing it. I don't know how to be vulnerable without seeing it as weakness. Angela studied him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but honest. Your father made you into a weapon. That's what I see. Someone sharp and dangerous and perfectly controlled. But weapons don't have lives. They have purposes. I know. So what do you want? To stop being a weapon? I don't know if I can. The family, the organization, they need me to be what my father made me. My uncle watches everything I do, waiting for weakness. The moment I show real compassion, real connection to someone, they'll exploit it, just like my father did with Maid. Then why risk it with me? Sun Yung met her eyes. Because for the first time in my life, I looked at someone and didn't calculate the risk. I just acted, and it felt more real than anything I've done in years. Angela was quiet, processing. Finally, she said, I don't trust you. Not completely. You've lived in a world of manipulation too long for me to believe this isn't another game. I know, but I think you're telling the truth about one thing. I think you are scared, and I think that's the most honest thing you've ever let yourself feel. She stood, smoothing her uniform. My shift ended 20 minutes ago. I need to catch the subway. Sun Yung stood as well. Angela, thank you for saving my mother, she said, meeting his eyes. Whatever your reasons, whatever you're going through, that gift was real, and I won't forget it. She paused. But if you really want to be different than your father, you can't just make one good choice. You have to make them consistently, even when it costs you something, especially then. She left him standing on the roof as night fell completely over Seoul. Sun Yung watched the city lights multiply, each one representing someone with a life he'd never considered, struggles he'd never noticed. He'd confessed his weakness to Angela Robertson, had exposed a fracture in his armor, had admitted he didn't know how to live, only survive. His father would have called it suicide. But standing alone in the dark, Sun Yung felt something his father had never allowed. Hope. Don't blink. Subscribe. Comment your country. Then watch what happens next. You're not ready. Sun To-won sat at the head of a private dining room in Gangnam, surrounded by 5 men who'd served his older brother for decades. The room was windowless, soundproof, swept for surveillance devices twice before the meeting. A bottle of 50-year-old baijiu sat on the table, barely touched. This wasn't a celebration. This was a reckoning. He paid for a cleaner's mother's surgery. To-won said, setting down a manila folder containing bank records, wire transfers, hospital documentation. $7,200 from the emergency fund for a foreign domestic worker. Park Min-soo, the family's financial controller, leaned forward to examine the documents. The transaction was flagged in our monthly audit. At first, I thought it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, Tae-won said. My nephew is becoming sentimental. The other men shifted uncomfortably. Sentimentality in their world wasn't a character flaw. It was a death sentence. Leaders who care about people made decisions based on emotion rather than strategy. They hesitated. They showed mercy. They created vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit. There's more, Tae-won continued. He slid another document across the table. Policy changes implemented over the past month. 20% pay increase for all lower-tier employees. Health insurance. Reduced shift hours. He's calling it efficiency optimization, but the math doesn't support it. We're spending an additional $42 million, one quarterly with no projected return. Maybe he's building loyalty, suggested Choi Dong-hyun, head of security. Loyalty. Tae-won's voice was sharp. We don't buy loyalty from cleaners and security guards. We buy compliance through adequate compensation and fear of termination. My brother understood this. He built this empire on calculation, not compassion. He pulled out another sheet, security footage stills. Sun Yung and Angela on the roof garden, sitting together, talking. Another image, Sun Yung in the security monitoring room late at night. Screens showing Angela's apartment building. A third, Sun Yung watching Angela work from his office doorway. He's obsessed with her, Tae-won said flatly. The cleaner, Angela Robertson, American, here on work visa, sends money home to a sick mother. My nephew has been watching her for weeks. Changed company policy to benefit her. Paid her family's medical bills. Meets with her privately. The men studied the photographs in silence. Finally, Park spoke. What do you want to do? Tae-won poured himself a careful measure of baijiu. My brother spent 30 years teaching his son that sentiment was weakness. That power required the ability to make ruthless decisions without hesitation. He groomed Sun Yung to lead this family with the same iron discipline he used. And now, 3 months after my brother's death, his son is undoing that training over a cleaning woman. He's young, Choi offered. Maybe he just needs. He needs to be tested. Tae-won's voice cut through the room like steel. A real test. not the performance he staged in his office. A test that proves whether he has the strength to lead this family or whether his sentimentality will destroy everything my brother built. He slid a final document across the table. Immigration records. Angela's visa status, work history, residential address, travel patterns. The girl is his weakness, Taewon said. We use her to force his hand. Make him choose between his empire and his compassion. If he chooses correctly, if he sacrifices her to maintain power, then perhaps he can still be salvaged. If he doesn't, what exactly are you proposing? Park asked carefully. We take her, not permanently, not violently. We simply create a situation where Sun Yung must make a choice. Taewon's expression was calm, almost paternal. The immigration authorities receive an anonymous tip that Angela Robertson has been working illegally, violating visa terms by accepting cash payments under the table. We provide fabricated evidence, photographs, bank records, testimony from concerned citizens. She's arrested, detained, facing deportation and criminal charges. And then we inform my nephew that we can make this disappear. One phone call, one favor owed. All he has to do is admit that she means nothing to him, that she's just a cleaner, that he won't waste family resources or political capital to save her. Taewon leaned back in his chair. If he agrees immediately, he passes a test. He proves he can make hard choices. But if he hesitates, if he tries to save her, if he exposes how much he actually cares, he proves he's weak. Choi finished. He proves he's compromised. Taewon corrected. And a compromised leader is a danger to everyone. The other families would exploit it. Our enemies would use her against him repeatedly. Better to expose his weakness now, before it costs us everything. The men exchanged glances. What Taewon was proposing was brutal but logical. In their world, attachments were weapons waiting to be used. A leader who could be manipulated through his feelings for a woman wasn't a leader. He was a liability. When Park asked, tomorrow, Friday evening, she leaves work at 7. Immigration will detain her at the subway station. She'll be processed through the system over the weekend, giving Sun Yung time to panic, time to show his true priorities. Taewon's smile was cold. My brother always said you can't know a man's character until you threaten something he loves. Let's see what my nephew really loves. The meeting ended. The men dispersed quietly, each carrying their piece of the operation. Taewon remained alone in the private room, finishing his baijio. He thought about his older brother, who'd raised his son with such careful cruelty, molding him into a weapon. All that work, potentially unraveling because of one woman with dignity and a dying mother. If Sun Yung failed this test, Taewon would have no choice. The family council would vote. Leadership would change hands. And Angela Robertson would be deported, her visa revoked permanently, her mother's treatment funding disappearing with her job. Sun Yung would learn the same lesson his father had taught him about Minicio. Love was a liability that cost you everything. Taewon finished his drink and left the restaurant. Outside, Seoul glittered with Friday night energy. People laughing, living, unaware of the calculations happening in rooms like this. Calculations that determined whose dreams survived and whose were crushed for the sake of power. By Monday, they'd know what kind of man Sun Yung really was, and whether his father's legacy would endure or die with him. Sun Yung got the call at 7:43 p.m. Friday evening. Angela had been detained at Itaewon Station by immigration enforcement. Suspected visa violations. Evidence of illegal supplementary income. She was being processed for deportation pending investigation. He knew immediately it was his uncle. The timing, the fabricated charges, the precision of it. Choi called 5 minutes later to confirm. We can make this go away. One call, but the council wants to meet with you first. Sunday morning, to discuss priorities. Sun Yung hung up without responding. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. They'd touched her, used her, turned her into a chess piece in their evaluation of his loyalty. He made 3 calls. First, his lawyer. I need everything on Angela Robertson's attention. Every document, every charge, every piece of evidence. Now. Second, to immigration. This is Sun Yung from Yungsen Holdings. We sponsor Angela Robertson's work visa. I need immediate clarification on her detention. Third, to Minho. Bring Angela to the penthouse the moment she's released. Don't ask questions. They released her at 10:15 p.m. No charges filed. No explanation given. Just a warning about visa compliance and a notation in her file. Minho brought her to the penthouse at 10:47. She looked exhausted and humiliated, still wearing her work uniform. Sun Yung met her in his private study, a room few people ever saw. Steel walls, reinforced door. His father had called it the panic room, though they'd never needed it. He dismissed Minho and locked the door. "Are you all right?" he asked. Angela's jaw tightened. "What just happened? Why was I detained and then suddenly released?" "My uncle, he's testing me, using you to prove I'm weak." "Weak? What is that?" She stopped, understanding dawning. "This is about what you told me, about your father's code, about Caring being a liability." "Yes." Angela sank into a chair, processing. "So what happens now?" Sun Yung had spent the past 3 hours calculating. His uncle had made the move perfectly. If Sun Yung fought for Angela openly, he'd prove he was compromised. The council would question his leadership. His enemies would know exactly how to manipulate him. Everything his father had built, everything he'd sacrificed, would unravel because of one woman. The smart play, the survival play, was clear. He pulled out an envelope from his desk drawer. $50,000. Cash, and a plane ticket to Philadelphia. Tomorrow morning, first class. Angela stared at the envelope like it was a snake. "What is this?" "Protection. They're using you to get to me. The only way to keep you safe is to remove you from the equation." His voice was flat, controlled, the tone his father had perfected. "You leave Seoul. I handle my uncle. Your mother's treatment will continue. I'll wire money monthly through an untraceable account. You'll never have to worry about her care again. You're paying me to leave. I'm paying you to survive." Angela stood slowly, her expression hardening. "And what about my job? My visa? My life here? You'll have a better life there. No more 14-hour shifts. No more shared apartments. You can be with your mother, with Marcus. Isn't that what you want?" "Don't," Angela said, her voice sharp. "Don't pretend this is about what I want. This is about what's convenient for you." "It's about keeping you alive," Sun Yung snapped. "My uncle won't stop with one warning. Next time it won't be immigration. It'll be something worse. I can't protect you if you stay." "You mean you won't protect me? Because it's too hard. Because it threatens your power." Angela's eyes blazed. 3 days ago you sat on that roof and told me you didn't know how to live, only survive. You said watching me made you want to be different than your father. And now, the moment it costs you something, you're doing exactly what he would do, paying off the problem, removing the vulnerability. That's exactly what this is." She pushed the envelope back across the desk. "I don't want your money, Mr. Sun. I don't want your guilt payments. I want you to be the person you said you wanted to be. But I guess that was just words." Sun Yung felt something crack inside his chest. "You don't understand. If I fight for you openly, I lose everything. The organization, the family. The council will remove me and put my uncle in charge. And he won't protect you. He'll destroy you just to prove a point. Then maybe you need to decide what matters more, your empire or your soul. I can't have both." "No," Angela said quietly. "You can't. And the fact that you're choosing the empire tells me everything I need to know." She walked to the door, then turned back. "I thought you were different. I thought maybe underneath all that armor, there was actually a person trying to get out. But you're just a boss, just like your father. Just like every powerful man who ever decided people were disposable when they became inconvenient. Angela, don't contact me again. I'll find another job, another visa sponsor. I'll figure it out, just like I always do. But I won't be your guilty conscience or your weakness or whatever story you tell yourself about who you almost were." She unlocked the door and left. Sun Yung stood frozen in his panic room, surrounded by steel walls and calculated safety. Holding $50,000 that meant nothing. He'd reverted. The moment pressure came, he'd gone back to his father's playbook. Throw money at the problem. Remove the vulnerability. Protect the power structure at any cost. It was the smart play, the survival play. It was exactly what his father would have done. Sun Yung looked at the envelope in his hands and felt the full weight of what Angela had said. He'd told her he wanted to be different, had confessed he didn't know how to live, had admitted watching her change him. But when tested, really tested, he'd chosen exactly the same path his father had chosen with Minessio. Sacrificed a person to protect a position. He left the penthouse at midnight, heading to face his uncle alone. He'd accept the council meeting, would prove he could make hard choices, would demonstrate that Angela meant nothing, that the detention had been unnecessary, that he remained the cold, calculated leader his father had trained. He'd win, keep his power, maintain control, and he'd lose the only thing that had made him feel human in 15 years. The elevator descended 62 floors. With each floor, Sun Yung felt himself sinking back into the armor his father had built. By the time he reached the lobby, his expression was blank, controlled, emotionless, exactly how his father had taught him to face the world. But somewhere in the elevator shaft above him, in the penthouse he'd just left, the envelope of money sat on the desk unclaimed. And Sun Yung knew, even as he walked toward the confrontation, that Angela had been right. He was just a boss, and he hated himself for it. Sun Yung didn't go to the council meeting Sunday morning. Instead, he spent Saturday night reviewing security footage, personnel files, and financial records. Not searching for Angela this time, searching for something else entirely. By dawn Sunday, he had what he needed. The council convened at 9 a.m. in the penthouse's formal dining room. 6 men plus his uncle, all seated, waiting. Sun Yung arrived 15 minutes late. A calculated move, the kind his father would have made. But when he entered, he wasn't alone. Minho stood behind him, and Choi Dong-hyun, head of security, and 12 others, building managers, logistics coordinators, finance officers, men whose salaries Sun Yung had raised, whose working conditions he'd improved, whose families now had health insurance because of policy changes implemented over the past month. His uncle's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to careful neutrality. "What is this?" Tae-won asked. "A demonstration," Sun Yung said. He remained standing while the council sat. "You tested me. Used Angela Robertson to prove I was weak, sentimental, compromised by caring about someone outside the bloodline. And you failed," Tae-won said smoothly. "You paid for her medical expenses, changed company policy for her benefit, watched her on surveillance. You proved exactly what I suspected. You've forgotten what leadership requires." "No," Sun Yung said. "I remember what leadership actually means." He placed a folder on the table. Financial projections, turnover statistics, productivity metrics. Employee retention is up 38% since the policy changes. Productivity increased 22%. Operating costs are down because we're not constantly training replacements. The efficiency optimization you mocked is generating an additional 74 million won quarterly. He looked at each council member. "My father taught me that fear creates compliance. But I've learned something he never understood. Respect creates loyalty. And loyalty is worth more than fear. This is about a cleaning woman," Tae-won said dismissively. "This is about recognizing that an empire built on cruelty will eventually crumble." Sun Yung's voice was steady. "You used Angela to test me. You were right, she matters to me. But not because I'm weak. Because she showed me that the code my father taught me confuses brutality with strength." He turned to the men standing behind him. "These men have families, children, debts and dreams and struggles my father never noticed because he saw them as tools, not people. I changed their working conditions not out of sentiment, but because I realized something. The moment you treat people like they're disposable, you teach them they owe you nothing." Minho stepped forward. "Mr. Sun could have fired me 6 times this year for minor infractions. Instead, he gave me a path to improvement. My daughter starts university next month because I can finally afford it." Choi spoke next. "I served his father for 20 years. Never once did he ask about my family. Sun Yung asked about my wife's surgery. Ensured I had time off to care for her. That's not weakness. That's the kind of leader men follow by choice, not obligation." One by one, the men behind Sun Yung spoke. Not rehearsed testimony, honest accounts of how small changes had transformed their lives. how respect had earned their genuine loyalty. When they finished, Sun Yung looked at his uncle. You think Angela is my weakness. You're wrong. She's my mirror. She showed me that my father's empire was built on the backs of people like her, and I never even noticed. You want to prove I'm unfit to lead? I'll prove something else. I'm fit to lead differently. The family won't accept. The family will accept what I decide. Sun Yung cut him off. I'm restructuring our legitimate holdings. Worker protections. Fair wages. Transparent operations. We'll compete without exploiting people. And if that makes me weak in your eyes, uncle, then you're welcome to challenge my leadership formally. Through the council vote, my father's bylaws require. Silence. Taewon's jaw tightened. A formal challenge would require majority council support. Sun Yung had just demonstrated he had the loyalty of their entire operational staff. A challenge would fracture the organization. This isn't over, Taewon said finally. Yes, it is. Sun Yung's voice was cold now. The steel his father had forged finally used for something beyond cruelty. You touched Angela to teach me a lesson. Consider the lesson learned, but not the one you intended. Touch her again, threaten her again, and I won't respond with strategy. I'll respond to the full weight of everything my father taught me about eliminating threats. Do you understand? Taewon understood. He stood and left, 2 other council members following. The remaining 3 stayed seated, uncertain. Sun Yung dismissed everyone except Minho. Where is she? Still at her apartment. She hasn't left since Friday night. Take me there. Angela's building looked different in daylight. Shabby but honest, alive with the sound of actual people living actual lives. Sun Yung climbed 3 flights of stairs, Minho waiting in the car below. He knocked on unit 304. Angela opened the door, surprise and wariness crossing her face. Sun Yung's lip was split. Taewon had gotten one hit in before leaving, and his knuckles were bruised from where he'd slammed his hand on the table for emphasis. I failed you, he said before she could speak. Friday night. I reverted to everything I said I didn't want to be. I tried to pay you off, remove the problem, protect myself. You were right. I was just a boss. Angela's expression remained guarded. Why are you here? Because I confronted my uncle this morning. Brought the men whose lives changed because of policy reforms I'm made watching you. Told the council I'm restructuring everything. And I realized I don't want to run an empire my father would be proud of. I want to build something you would respect. That's not my burden to carry. I know, but I'm asking anyway. He pulled out a different envelope. Not cash this time. Head of Corporate Administration. Yongsen Holdings legitimate operations. Real position. Real authority. Salary of 200 million won annually. Full benefits. Visa sponsorship. You'd oversee worker relations, policy development, organizational reform. Angela stared at the contract. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. You showed me what dignity looks like under pressure. What strength actually means. I need someone who won't let me forget that. Someone who'll challenge me when I revert to old patterns. He met her eyes. I'm still scared. Still learning. Still fighting everything my father burned into me. But I'd rather fight it with you than surrender to it alone. Angela took the contract, reading carefully. When she looked up, her expression was softer but still cautious. If I accept this, I'm not accepting you. Not romantically. Not as anything except a professional commitment to help you build something better. I understand. And the moment you revert to paying people off or treating them as disposable, I walk. No negotiation. Agreed. She studied him for a long moment. Then impossibly she smiled, small but real. You look terrible. My uncle disagreed with my management philosophy. Good. You probably deserved it. She held out her hand. I'll take the job, Mr. Sun. But you're on probation. Prove you mean this. Sun Yung shook her hand, feeling the weight of the promise behind it. 6 months later, the business press called it revolutionary. Sun Yung had transformed Yongsen Holdings from a shadowy empire into a model of transparent corporate governance. Angela Robertson, now head of corporate administration, was interviewed by every major outlet about the company's worker-focused reforms. At the annual shareholder meeting, Sun Yung stood with Angela at his side, announcing another round of policy changes. His uncle sat in the back row, diminished but present. The old guard remained, but their influence had waned. After the meeting, Sun Yung and Angela stood on the roof garden where he'd first confessed his weakness. The city sprawled below them, alive with possibility. "Your father would hate what you've built," Angela said. "I know. Does that bother you?" Sun Yung considered. "No, because I'm not building this for him anymore. I'm building it for people like you. People who deserve better than what his empire offered." Angela smiled. "Then you're finally learning how to live, not just survive." They stood together as the sun set over Seoul. Not lovers, not yet, perhaps not ever, but partners in something his father never could have imagined. An empire tempered by humanity. Power wielded with compassion. Strength proven through protection rather than cruelty. Sun Yung looked at Angela and realized he'd finally broken free from his father's code. And he'd done it not by becoming weak, but by learning what Real's strength looked like. It looked like her.